Great. So we'll be having a conversation about kind of broad topics: entrepreneurship, community development, and cultural preservation. And so how about we start with all of you kind of briefly introducing yourself, your organization, and then we'll get into some of the substantive questions. Jan, you want to start?
My name is Jan Lee. I am a third generation Chinatown resident and third generation property owner in Chinatown of 2 rent stabilized buildings. I've owned a business in Chinatown for 18 years in my past life, and my family has owned various businesses in Chinatown, from Chinese hand laundry to a coffee shop to dry cleaners and a number of different things. So I have a perspective about entrepreneurship and also property ownership in an ethnic neighborhood. So I look forward to answering any questions that you have about that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vic Lee. I'm the co-founder of Welcome to Chinatown. Welcome to Chinatown is a nonprofit that is supporting Manhattan's Chinatown through cultural preservation and economic development. I think it is. Should I put it up? It is on. Should I just put it higher? Yeah. Is this better? Okay, I'll just hold this for now. Through small businesses, cultural development, cultural preservation, economic development of Manhattan's Chinatown through its small businesses and entrepreneurs. Also a native New Yorker and a Chinatown resident.
Hello? Oh, there you go. Third generation owner, operator of Jing Fong Restaurant in Chinatown. My grandfather started it back in the 70s. My dad got involved later on, and I came on board around 2010, 11. So I've seen a shift in how Chinatown has changed over the last 15 years. And before that, I was kind of one of you guys. I went to undergrad business school, did the whole banking thing, and then realized it wasn't for me. Kind of switched over, and yeah. So some people ask me which one is better. And I say sometimes I regret leaving banking for this life. But I've definitely learned and seen a lot through this process that I definitely don't think I would have learned through banking.
All right, let's start the conversation off with Vic. Why don't you tell us about Welcome to Chinatown, how it got started, what motivated you to start it, and the particular time in which you started it and the challenges you faced?
Yeah. So for Welcome to Chinatown, well, first off, I don't have a nonprofit background. I worked in a Fortune 500 company. I ran their global travel and meetings team. So I worked in procurement and alongside like global risk, HR. And I noticed around like 2020 that Chinatown was really suffering from COVID and the xenophobia. So I was a resident and had kind of noticed like the decline in foot traffic, and I'd felt all of the shifts and the impacts of historical disasters on Chinatown, like back from like the 9/11 terrorist attacks to thinking about like Hurricane Sandy. I even remember during SARS, like my parents expressing concerns about xenophobia during that time. So I think that seeing that sense of loss like really motivated me to just try to think about what do I do and how do I do something. I just posted like on Instagram. I said like I have an idea. I just want to think about how do we help get cash in the hands of business owners, because people were posting at the time, buy gift cards, support your local business. If you've been to Chinatown, you know that a lot of businesses are still cash only. So it's like, well, we can't offer them that option of gift cards, and instead thought about what if we just help them get onboarded onto like Square or do something like so. Posted an Instagram story, and then my co-founder, who's a good friend of me of mine, just DM'd me and said like, I've been thinking about this too. Let's just try and do something. So we were just exchanging DM messages back and forth, and then finally I was like, all right, let me just grab this domain, welcome to Chinatown.com. And then that was like how we started the really early days. I think that one of the like biggest lessons we learned when getting started was we tried to convince business owners to get onto a gift card platform. Like, we'll show you, okay, how to like sign on to Square. I use my really broken Cantonese to like explain it. And we talked to probably about 3 businesses. They were like, thank you, but no. Like, there's a sense of trust. There's a language barrier. And the digital divide within Chinatown, look back at city research papers, those are consistently one of the recommendations. Chinatown has to digitalize, but it hasn't. So it was naive of us to think like we could tackle it in this little like microcosm, but what it ended up doing was just allowed us to open doors, have conversations, and then eventually we pivoted different initiatives where we were able to build trust and just kind of kept going from this like little trial into like next steps, and then now we're just running a nonprofit.
Hmm. And one thing about Chinatown is it's known for its cultural history, right? So a lot of who you probably were catering to and who have interest in Chinatown are the older generation, and yet you're also trying to stimulate entrepreneurship and an interest among the younger generation. So Jan, this question's for you. As a property developer and engaged in local politics, like what are some of the conversations in that space about how to use the properties in Chinatown and so forth?
Sure. Well, first, don't put me in the category of developer. In Chinatown, that's a dirty word, right? Because we're much more humble than that. The two tenement buildings that we own were built in 1870, and they're brick and wood buildings. So you can imagine some of the infrastructure that needs that something like that takes over the course of 100 years. Not only have we expended millions of dollars in taxes, but we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars maintaining buildings to keep them in good shape to be able to rent to businesses. That in itself is a challenge. We also house some of New York's most vulnerable people. And there's hundreds of families like mine, thousands in New York City, 960,000 rent stabilized units, which represents about 25% of the housing stock. With rent regulations, the city dictates what the rent increases are. And that means that the only unfettered rents are the commercial spaces. And so those commercial spaces bear a lot of the brunt of the deficits from the tenants upstairs. How many people have been to Chinatown in Manhattan? As an idea. So thank you. 75% of all of the apartments in the Lower East Side in Chinatown are rent stabilized. So that gives you an idea of how difficult it is when, we've had rent freezes in the past. If you remember during COVID, there was a big movement to cancel rent. Well, canceling rent did not come with canceling taxes. It did not come with canceling our Con Ed bills, and it did not come from stopping the oil bills that we still had to pay. And all during that period, none of the tax deadlines were rolled back. So as I always say, that the city still wanted their pound of flesh, even though people were burdened by not being able to work and finding solutions to just exist. So it has put a big burden, even without COVID existing, a hardship on the commercial properties citywide in rent stabilized buildings. That's just one of the things that I think Vic and I talk about often. And if you haven't visited the hub at 115 Bowery, it's grown from a laptop into a wonderful space that we're able to send young entrepreneurs to understand what it is to open businesses.
And just connecting back to this idea about serving a community that maybe is of an older generation, but many of the entrepreneurs of a newer generation. What kind of businesses are you guys focused on starting and supporting and nurturing? And how does that are there tensions involved in the kind of businesses that younger entrepreneurs are interested in, and what the older generation maybe is comfortable with?
Maybe Truman can speak to that, because he's a second, third generation business owner.
I think over the years, being in the restaurant business, I've had many conversations with Vic and Jan. I think they can both say that it kind of shows through in a lot of these things I talk about. Is I'm quite demoralized by the situation we're in, and I don't know that this is just a me situation versus a Chinatown situation versus a citywide situation, and the reason why I say that is, and people will ask me, "Oh, why don't you expand the restaurant?" Right? Like people who have not been in restaurant business and retail, they'll say, "Oh, this looks like a good spot, right? The rent is cheap, and it seems affordable." And I just tell everybody it's not worth it here, right? It's 100% not worth it for mom and pop shops because over the last 15 years, all I have seen is my margins get squeezed, right? The rules and regulations here are not receptive for small businesses. Um, and the thing I've been thinking about recently is back in my days at business school, there was always the concept of stakeholder equity versus shareholder equity, right? And that's something I've been thinking about the last few months again. And I think there are obviously pros and cons for both sides of the argument. We're in an environment now where we focus too much on stakeholder equity and we've forgotten about the shareholders, at least at the small to medium-sized businesses like ours, right? Because we went from a business that was doing pretty well in Chinatown when Chinatown was still bustling. And I think a lot of the rules and regulations have dispersed people to make them not want to live in a place like Chinatown because it's just too expensive. New immigrants coming in don't even pass by Chinatown anymore because they've built their own little communities in Brooklyn and Flushing. So top line growth has been slowed, obviously, but the other side of the equation is the expenses have exploded. For example, and I understand this, right? Like nobody wants to see somebody make $7.25 an hour, right? Which was what minimum wage was when I first. It is now $16.50 an hour, right? So it's basically 2x in that time. But that's not a reflection of my true costs, right? In Chinese, we have a saying that's basically, what is it? It's a multiple of 3. I forget the exact saying in Chinese, but it's basically a multiple of 3. So every dollar of our expenses that go up, it gets reflected 3x on our expense line, right? Because like say your minimum wage went up $8 an hour, right? You forget the fact that workers' compensation is based on minimum wage, payroll taxes are based on your dollar value, right? So everything's kind of exploding together with it. And kind of to circle back to your question is, I just keep telling people, I don't think it's worth it here anymore, right? I'm doing it because we've been around for so long and we're kind of surviving. And I would say most small businesses are not thriving. Everyone's just trying to survive to get through. And we're all hopeful that this is another cycle. We'll take the pain for now and we see a better day going forward, right? Because it's a tough environment right now.
And what is the local policy situation? I imagine other neighborhoods go through similar kinds of struggles. How does Chinatown compare or contrast with the kind of support that other neighborhoods of similar problems that maybe are facing? Can you speak on that?
For one, I think we should set the scale about Truman's family and what he's provided to Chinatown. Truman's Restaurant at one time seated 1,000 people and did it every night. So the impact of Truman's Restaurant in the economy of just Chinatown, single family owner who have background in infrastructure and plumbing, they created basically an anchor for Chinatown. And so not having businesses of that size anymore in Chinatown that can seat like 1,000 people 5 nights a week definitely impacts the rest of Chinatown. And so now everyone talks about where is the next Jing Fong? Where are we going to be able to have that? And what the answer to that is they've moved to Brooklyn. Brooklyn has more space. They're less rent. They have parking out there. And so there's a number of things that are impacting us. Congestion pricing has caused people to just not come to Chinatown because there are alternatives. People from New Jersey, from the other boroughs, stop coming into Chinatown because they have alternatives where they can park also. So there's a confluence of things that with an anchor business like Truman's family, losing that ripples throughout Chinatown. People would come to a banquet, but they would spend time before and after visiting that restaurant. So I think that just to set the scale about Truman is not a small town business that's just, your corner restaurant. This was a family that supplied weddings, banquets, funerals, dim sum, everything that you wanted to do in town anchored around a business like his. What is the city doing to develop another restaurant like that? That's the big question. Are there tax incentives? Are there landlords like myself, if I had a business, a place big enough, are we getting tax incentives that would entice us to do that? No, we're not. Developers who are building around Chinatown, towers, are getting tax breaks. During COVID, nonprofit housing providers got tax-free. I didn't. So there's this dichotomy between whether or not small property owners, and actually there was the building that you're in now is a small property owner who owns that building, are not getting incentives to stay in New York. They're not getting incentives to continue on to house people like Truman's business. And that's part of the problem. So if we're trying to talk about rent freezes and cancel rents, we also have to talk about canceling for a period a tax increase. And one of the other things that's very challenging is that mayor after mayor has talked about unraveling the black box of tax assessments and how we get taxed as small property owners. No, as you know, no mayor has successfully done that. And so that without that missing piece of unraveling how the Department of Finance puts assessments on small buildings, we're just going to keep going down the same road of having people leave New York.
And just to piggyback off of that, I always like to talk about this one tax that people don't realize we have solely in Manhattan below 96th Street, which is the commercial rent tax. So the commercial rent tax is basically any I believe it's just retail, or it might be any rent payer. If you're paying more than $250,000 a year in rent, the city will tax you for the amount over that, right? So you can imagine with how expensive rent is already in the city, basically everyone's paying this. And it's only in Manhattan below 96th Street because for whatever reason, it was installed throughout the boroughs and every other district repealed it except for Manhattan. So that ends up being like, if you're a restaurant paying like $300,000 in rent, you're paying an additional, call it $10,000 to $15,000 a year in that tax. You're paying tax on an expense.
So where are the voices speaking up for the neighborhood? Where's the younger generation coming to lead and succeed, and maybe continue some of these businesses? Vic, maybe you can talk about kind of succession planning and kind of inspiring maybe the new young generation to speak out against some of these challenges and change things.
Yeah, I think that for Chinatown, I mean, things obviously sound bleak and extreme, and at times it's like, well, how do you solve it? Because it seems like it's a combustion of all those all these various factors. For Welcome to Chinatown, we're mostly a millennial Gen Z team, and the majority of our team are also children of immigrants. And I think that being children of immigrants is often like a superpower that our team has like talked and leaned into, which is like, you have high EQ. That like, I remember growing up at the dinner table and it was like, your elders speak, but you don't speak, and you listen and you listen. And like, I've learned how to like observe body language, how to understand things that are said but not spoken. And those are things that I think our team has really understood, these characteristics of what's needed to build deep institutional trust. Word of mouth has been some of the most important things. We built our small business innovation hub. We actually opened it earlier this year in its final stage. I encourage you all to come visit. That's at 115 Bowery. It was a significant investment for a nonprofit of our organization of our size. So to give you a sense, our annual budget is about 1.6 million. The capital expenses for that, for the hub, was about $1 million. So we signed a 10-year lease, and why I felt very strongly to go into this direction was that we knew Chinatown was lacking a third space. And this came up constantly in focus groups. One of the biggest memories I have of like, this is like the aha moment of we have to do this. We had a focus group with younger, older entrepreneurs that was a few hours long. And these are businesses, some of them have been established for decades. They would interact with the younger business owners and be like, oh, I like love your business. Like I see you all on social media. And the younger businesses are like, I've been going to you for decades. My family is like, has always eats here. And it was like their first time meeting. and realizing that there's so much synergies and opportunities and desire to learn for each other, but there's just too many of these barriers and time constraints to create to be able to foster that. So we felt that in order to see the success of our programming and to think about what community engagement looks like, to be able to create this third space that ultimately can incubate the next generation of businesses, including succession planning, because we do have a number of retiring business owners, retiring property owners, but also begin to think about really, really good ideas and how can Chinatown start to become the center of ingenuity and be able to actually execute very creative things centered around social entrepreneurship.
And Jan, how do you think about this issue and maybe importance of succession planning for the Chinatown?
I think it takes younger people like Vic and her team to understand the bridge between technology and business. And that's where we have Chinese Chamber of Commerce. We have as many as 18 family associations whose function was as immigrant safe spaces to function as that guide into America for 100 years. Many of these associations are older than that. But they failed in the modern sense because there wasn't a replenishment of their board, and there wasn't an idea to make sure that businesses catch up technologically. And that's where young people like Vic's team come in to bridge that gap, but also to figure out a space large enough in Chinatown that can actually function with that. In Manhattan, it's not easy to find space. And I think that one of the fortunate things that we have with Welcome to Chinatown and a number of nonprofits who have finally landed in permanent space is that they can actually create the programming for young people to come to physically be there for an extended period of time. One of the things that Vic is working on with me is to turn one of my vacant spaces into an incubator hub. It's extremely novel in Chinatown to even have that concept and to turn a space into a white box that can be reimagined. Vic and I have yet to discuss what's actually what's beyond the white box. Some of that has to do with the fact that I'm in a building that's built in 1870. You know, we have to build out what the building can handle. There's 2 restaurants that exist in my building, so infrastructure is an issue. We can't just upgrade electrical or upgrade the sewer system or upgrade the water. So these are things that restrict us to some degree. But we have to work within those parameters to give young entrepreneurs a chance to experiment with a space that's not going to put their entire family into debt if they fail. And then on best case scenario, in a year, maybe we'll turn out 2 or 3 entrepreneurs that continue on to larger spaces. But it's this kind of forward thinking that Chinatown, believe it or not, in 200 years hasn't really had until now. And it's taken that bridge between technology, willing landlords, and as Vic had started off this discussion, the building of trust. You can't come into Chinatown and do what Vic has done. It had to have been from somebody who understands Chinatown, who understands the business people, and who understands the cultural sensitivity in what it takes to make those things happen. It just cannot have come from the outside.
I also just want to tap on a point that Jan was talking about, which is experimentation. We are part of a state entrepreneur assistance center. We're one of 22 or 26 EACs all across New York State. This is our first year being an EAC. It is abundantly clear to me that we are not evolving right now in the way about how we teach early stage entrepreneurs. And like, there's so much emphasis on, and I look at like for the EAC requirements, I look at this grants that were measured against, Sid here is an early stage entrepreneur. I may not have a product yet or anything, but write out your business plan. Tell me like how are you going to helping an entrepreneur right now who she's hoping to incubate a space for that's child, parent, and family friendly, but in maybe a more adult forward atmosphere, but still really, really safe for kids. And they're like, okay, well, what's your membership model? Like think about already like your membership model, your subscriber fees, how much are you going to charge? She doesn't know her target demographic yet. And the best way to do that is like, you just have to get out there and you have to go and you have to talk to people. But things and more demands that we see, like markets, the amount of time it takes to be able to set up, the rising costs of real estate, and that every small business owner now also has to be their own marketer because you're supposed to have a brand presence, you're supposed to be on social media. and you have to do all of this while being an owner operator because you're going to bootstrap and keep things really low. How do you expect people to succeed? And I think the mindset of just go ahead and open a business, go full in is not the way to go, and that we should be promoting more flexible spaces and sandboxes to really, really give people a chance to understand if they actually have a proof of concept and it's worth like, yes, I should quit my job and I should go all in on this. I think there has to be more experimentation to foster it, and we're the best position to do this, particularly when we couple this with like technology that allows us to have more bespoke, smaller ideas.
So earlier you said you feel a little demoralized, with all this restaurant history falling on your shoulders. How does efforts like this, how do you think about it? Does it lift your spirits a bit?
Yeah, no, I actually really agree with both Vic and Jan. I'm glad to hear that they're working on this, and it really struck a chord when Jan was like, we don't want entrepreneurs and small businesses to put their entire families in debt, right? Because one of the things I think about on a daily basis and anything that I consider doing moving forward is, what are my liabilities? Because nowadays, the exposure to liability as a business owner is enormous. You get sued for all sorts of stuff. The latest one I got was, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, you give us an example.
Yeah, I can't even believe it, because I got an email a few weeks back, and it was like from an attorney that I've never heard of, and they said, "Oh, you are being sued for your website not being ADA compliant."
ADA, yep.
And then I was like, okay, this is probably a scam. I'm going to ignore it. 2 days later, I got another email from a different attorney fishing for my business. And then I was like, okay, I probably should look this up, search for some kind of court filing to see if it was true. And it was true. I was being sued for my website not being ADA compliant. I don't know what aspect of it was not ADA compliant. I didn't even know this was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then I had to call my own attorney to check this up for me, and he said, this is real. And when it's all said and done, basically it's a frivolous lawsuit. You end up settling, and literally it just costs thousands of dollars, right? And that's just one example that has nothing to do with what I'm doing on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
right? And these are all the types of challenges that you face. And in that respect, I'm constantly thinking about, how do I limit liability, and how does a business succeed and become profitable when that's what you're thinking about all day, instead of, not instead of, but on top of, how do I grow sales? How do I manage talent? How do I hire right now, right? Like, for us, it's, how do we improve service? Maybe we need to think of new dishes. There's a whole gamut of things you think about before ADA on your website.
Are there mechanisms in place at the community level to help support these, or is it each family on their own dealing with these kind of challenges?
So one of the boards that I sit on is a group called Small Property Owners of New York, and it's specifically designed for families like mine. It's 5 boroughs primarily, and it is to answer questions like this. To have a database of information that's up to date, to teach small owners about the codes and changes that are happening so that we are compliant all the time. Remember that 51 members of the city council get reelected on how many laws they pass. And some of the laws that they pass make no sense, but they get reelected. And so if you think about 51 members of the city council thinking of laws that they can pass, in 10 years, that's hundreds of laws that we now have to comply with. It could be sidewalk space law, it could be compliance about ADA websites, it could be a lot of things that add further burdens. But a lot of these 51 council members have never lifted a hammer. They've not sat behind a kitchen like Truman's family have, but they conceive these things in their head. And we, as the small property owners and the entrepreneurs that are trying to open business and exist, bear the brunt of these bad ideas. And so I think that that's one of the things that the incoming administrations have to think about. Is it necessary to have so many laws? Are they really saving people's lives? Are they really reasonable to a small property owner?
And Vic, how do you think about this, especially as you're incubating new entrepreneurs?
I think especially for the hub, one of the biggest things that like I've seen as a positive is like that network effect, and that entrepreneurs who, first is like I see our team as generalists. Like I don't have a particular like I think I would say specific thing that I'm like really really good at, and a lot of our team has this really good generalist mentality to come in and like identify, okay, what do we think is the core issue, and instead find those that have the skilled expertise to come in and play that like matchmaking role. um, this has been amplified with the creation of our hub and being able to gather people from all different diverse backgrounds, walks of life, experience. And I think like that's where that potential is. Like hearing about now, in the case of, for example, like Truman and like the ADA website, this is something like we're starting to hear about. And this is like probably in the past, I would say 2 months, probably like 8 to 10 businesses that I've already heard who've gone through, have been sued by like some of these more predatory practices. So, well, are there some really talented technologists here who could help us like very quickly implement things within websites that make it ADA compliant? Like, I don't always want to be on the defensive here, but there are these like short-term interventions that we could see, but then bigger thing is like, all right, what do we do if we see unintended consequences of like good intended policy being passed? Do we start to have more of that we can now think about things at more of like a macro level? So yeah, ultimately all to say, like, I think there's a lot of potential that can be driven out of that network effect of like having a anchor like third space in the community.
So I would like to give time for Q&A, but before kind of opening it up, any final words or maybe thoughts for students? Many of the audience here are students. What takeaway would you like them to have regarding this topic, regarding kind of community development and cultural preservation?
Well, with regard to community development, Welcome Chinatown recently held a Chinatown Solidarity Conference. It was the second of its kind. The first one was in Canada, and I had the privilege of attending and representing some New York owners and properties. One thing that we learned about the Chinatowns across North America was that the first Chinese who came were sort of corralled into areas in these cities that were often undesirable, and not just often undesirable, they were sort of the worst parts of the cities, including the Five Points district where Chinatown exists today. As we started talking to other Chinatown leaders, we realized that systemic racism is very much behind the location of where Chinatowns exist, but it doesn't stop in just the existing initially. It is the continuance of putting unwanted land use things into Chinatowns first. And so we look at Chinatowns across North America. They often are the recipients of the highest number of homeless shelters. That's certainly the case in Chinatown. Vic and I have been fighting against the tallest jail in the world, the 5th iteration of a jail to be built in Chinatown, but the largest in America and the most expensive building in the history of the United States is going to be in Chinatown. And so we're stuck in a cycle in North American Chinatowns where we're always the recipient of unwanted land use projects, but never compensated appropriately. And so the growth of Chinatowns is often hemmed in by gigantic land use projects that are physically hemming us in, but economically hemming us in as well. And the success that we see in Chinatown is despite these things. It's not because government has helped us. It's in spite of the fact that we're working under this suffocating blanket. And I think that the positive side of that is that even with that, since the COVID lockdown, we counted as many as 25 or more, Vic has the numbers, entrepreneurs who have opened shop in Chinatown since the COVID lockdown. Those businesses deserve a chance. And I think that the incoming administrations, whoever they are, need to figure out a way to compensate landlords who are housing these businesses, but also find out if we can offer tax incentives to businesses in New York City that house long-time legacy businesses. Hopkey Restaurant in my building has been there since 1938. Think about how many kitchen table talks we've had in my family with that family to renew those leases since 1938. Is he compensated? No. Am I compensated? No. And the hope and a prayer that these longtime businesses that we love are just going to be there isn't enough in today's environment. And so if we stop dumping on Chinatowns and we offer incentives in the way of taxes, we unravel this mysterious black box of real estate taxes, maybe we'll get somewhere. But we are working within a very, very difficult system.
I feel it's important to be more immersive within your community, and especially for those that want to solve issues, like finding ways to actually like interact with the constituents or clients that you ultimately hope to serve. I have seen a big disconnect in people who like want to build really good like products, services. And when it boils down to like, wait, did you actually get feedback from them? Like, are they part of your test group? Have you been able to maybe try, like, say if I'm in building something like an app for restaurants, like, do you know what it's like to work in the back of a kitchen? Does it actually make sense in their operations? And I think it's just so important. And it's often like that, a little bit of a disconnect from like studying and strategizing around it versus real world application. So the more that you can bridge that real world application, the more likely that whatever you're trying to do will actually be successful.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point that I wanted to hit as well. It was just more that try to get as much actual experience doing whatever you wanted to try to pursue, whether it's through mentors who have been through it, and, you know, starting from the bottom and kind of every day learning something new in that field that you're trying to get into. Don't take any assumptions that you read out there as truth, and nothing beats experience.
Great. With that, let's open it up to questions. Any questions out? Yep.
Hi, thank you all so much for sharing your like personal experiences. I'm actually a graduate of the School of Social Work at Columbia, and I'm developing, and I'm also a software developer. I have a social impact AI native app that's trying to help people start small businesses, particularly in their community, right? So I'm like fourth generation, but my grandmother's mother came over, and I grew up with stories about, you know, immigrating to the US. So I really appreciate the community that even in the 70s, there was still existed. And I'd love to see that back. I think with AI, it's more important than ever for people to start their own businesses, because I think a lot of corporations are just not going to have jobs for people soon. So I love what you're doing, Vic, and I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot from listening to both Jan and Truman about your business and your struggles, and Vic, how you're innovating. And I'm also thinking about, you know, as somebody who comes from the social work background, having to deal a lot with government subcontracting and regulations. I worked in healthcare for a long time. Is there some form of collaboration that can occur among the Chinatowns across the Northeast? And even, I mean, there are other ethnic groups that have these similar struggles. I work with in Oregon State with the Black community that similarly they dumped on their, and then when their land becomes valuable, it's taken from them, right? So where these communities might be able to form some type of political action committee and do a lobby for these changes, because unfortunately, in my experience, the only time change actually occurs is when there's that economic pressure on the politicians to make these changes that you're talking about, Jan. So I'm wondering, Vic, if that's in your work or on your roadmap for something you're thinking about doing.
We have my co-founder and I, we were really intentional that our work, direct work, would never expand beyond Manhattan Chinatown. And that was because we felt that for the work that we wanted to do, we had to really intimately understand the neighborhood and not think about, oh, let's immediately like scale. People were like, go to Flushing, go to Sunset Park. Those are drastically different neighborhoods. And instead, though, having more of like an open source approach to our work. So in Jan talking about that Chinatown Solidarity Conference, we're actually talking to DC's Chinatown, which has been super active. And we've built a Chinatown directory, which actually in the long-term goal is turning it into a community loyalty program. that can reward people for doing individual, like supporting your individual businesses, but you unlock things as you go to more businesses, et cetera. We have the infrastructure for the directory. So we were like, just plug into our directory. Just go ahead and use it, start building it out, as well as like our hub and the blueprints. Also out of that conference, we were able to talk to Vegas. Vegas has one of the only growing Chinatowns across the US. And they were like, we have a 6,000 square foot space that we didn't know what to do with it. Would you share your like strategy for the hub and do it there? And we're like, yeah, we'll connect you with our architect, all of that. So I think there's more potential in what you've established, like what you said in that kind of like collaboration. We're really truthfully hindered by like capacity and funding to be able to do broader like lobbying efforts and so forth. Last thing that like wasn't kind of a question, but just a thought that when you were talking about your what you're building, when it comes to like AI and small business owners, I think that there's sometimes like an overemphasis on we need to immediately train business owners on how to use AI. It's very important that I think people have options and like they can decide whether or not they want to use XYZ, and they should have like baseline knowledge. But I think there's like really strong potential instead to have more like matchmaking opportunities, or like being able to bring in like kind of like fractional consultants, fractional tools that business owners are able to quickly employ and then delve deeper into it. Most of business owners I've talked about are just like too tired to like learn another tool and so forth. So the more that can be easily built, handed to them to solve really specific things, and maybe that is like a consultant coming in, building something more bespoke and custom, I feel like that's a really, really great opportunity.
I want to take a different tack on this and agree with everything that Vic said, but something that you brought up about the solidarity of 18 Chinatowns, and there are more than 18 Chinatowns in North America. It was just that's what the conference could facilitate. Think about for a moment the power, economic power of 18 Chinatowns across North America. Think about a misstep of a corporation who offends the Chinatown community in some way, and think about the power of 18 Chinatowns saying we no longer will carry your product in our 18 Chinatowns. That's a reaction that can happen overnight. And the way that happens is they'll digitally link the Chinatowns, and that has yet to happen. It's one of the things that I've been talking to the leadership of the Chinatown Solidarity Conference, that linking 18 Chinatowns digitally will enable us to react very quickly to market changes, but also to possibly purchase en masse, or influence a government, or have a voting bloc that can quickly change. And I think that one of the biggest fears of government is to link up all the Chinatowns across North America, to be quite frank. And if we had the power technologically to do that, we can afford change that will happen very quickly, whether it's looking for tax incentives, or changes in product, or incentivizing on tariffs, for instance. All of these things can happen very quickly if we're linked digitally. And I think that we need to work toward that goal. So if there's anyone out there willing to give us grants to do that, we'll definitely work on it. But I think that that's the thing that we need to work toward.
Truman, you have any thoughts on coalition building from a family business perspective?
I mean, not specifically on this. I think Vic and Jen kind of covered a lot of it.
Okay, great.
I also think Truman's family is a wealth of knowledge. I mean, if we had linked Chinatowns and Truman's family could give seminars, think about the power of just one family's entrepreneurship and what they can share. Truman and Vic are very modest, but you're looking at people that I'm sharing the stage with that are such a deep well of knowledge that if it were shared across Chinatowns, it would solve a lot of problems of families that just don't have access. And they're very well trusted, so that it goes back to having people in Chinatowns that are trustworthy to tell us.
Other questions?
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for the great panel. My name is Kevin, and I'm a first-year MBA student, but before this, I was part of an organization called Send Chinatown Love, doing some work in Chinatowns here. So one thing that I've always thought about, I'm not originally from New York. I grew up in Sacramento, California, but I do feel like I grew up in a community that had some similarities, little Saigon over there. And something I've always grappled with was, since I'm not a part of growing up here in New York, just what my role is within Chinatowns here, though wanting to be supportive of it. And I think one theme that I heard from your stories was this aspect of supporting continuity and also identity being a big part of that. So curious for us in the room who didn't grow up in New York City's Chinatowns, but we are probably looking to do either nonprofit work, entrepreneurship work, working in real estate, etc. Like what your approach you would recommend towards approaching these issues very thoughtfully, given our identities.
I think for Chinatown, first it's like the neighborhood is going to evolve, and that from 2010 to 2020, the census statistics, there's a 22% decrease in the API population within Chinatown. And the reality is, like, what we perceive as Chinatown will probably become more Pan-Asian, and as well as it's just going to become more diverse beyond like kind of the Chinese Asian community. But there's something at the heart of like Chinatown that we always have really wanted to harness, which is the sense of like cultural discovery, as well as how do we lean more into small business ingenuity that comes out of historically ethnic enclaves. That doesn't mean that it, again, the Chinatown that exists back then, and that's what's gonna like we should be ushering into the future. Where, and like I kind of emphasize that because we often have people who come to us to say like, I'm not Chinese, I'm white, like I'm Black, I'm etc. But I feel a little awkward about perhaps like getting like openly involved or feeling out of place with that. And that shouldn't be the case. Instead, I think a friend of mine has had the approach of, you want to be a good neighbor and a good community member, look at like what could you do within your 10 blocks, and you would be really surprised. There's so many things you could do within your 10 blocks. If you have more of that mentality and just like identify something that is within walking distance from you and just reach out and get involved, and I feel that opens a lot of doors and more organic relationships.
I just follow her lead. Anything she asked me to do, I'm okay.
That's that trust building. Yeah. Any other questions? We have time for maybe one more. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila. I am actually a postdoc working at the Tamer Institute with Dan here. And we're working on a set of questions precisely related to all the struggles and experience we've had. So I have maybe a couple questions. One is, I think Alan has mentioned a couple of times about a succession plan for a lot of the businesses in Chinatown. I'm just curious, not every family has Truman who's willing to kind of take over the family business and continue. There's so many vital, essential businesses in Chinatown. And what's your experience as to what their plan is for the future? How are they taking over? Who's going to take over? And what implications there are for the neighborhood? So that's question number one. And the second one is really kind of a little bit forward looking for Chinatown. Vic, you've mentioned that you and Jen are hoping to have an incubator to encourage young entrepreneurs to start their business. There is a lot of emphasis on technology, but what we also know is with innovation-driven entrepreneurship, it usually doesn't take place physically in the neighborhood. It can get expanded and it will be global. And so how do you think about the tension between encouraging kind of innovation-based technology versus having kind of brick and mortar businesses in the neighborhood where they become the actual physical third places where people can actually gather and function as an anchor that, Truman's family business has functioned for the neighborhood?
Maybe I can answer in reverse, because that way Truman could just speak really quickly to some of the challenges of actually, even though he's now the owner, like some of the own challenges of succession planning. But the gap with kind of like innovation, or what you, in your question around like innovation and making sure that what's being built is going to be built like for the community and how to resolve with that tension. I do feel that we should be able to build like moving into the direction of building things that are actually smaller, more bespoke, and not necessarily being like, this is going to be like the next unicorn. I think that mentality there and finding individuals who are willing and to adopt that, and then encouraging those to actually build in our space, build in the community. We will allow you to like come co-work, test different ideas. We'll connect you with a bunch of different people. Lastly, just around succession planning, there's a number of people who may want to like buy businesses right now, especially those that are like have wealth in the corporate sector. They don't tend though to be owner operators, that they're willing to put the capital but can't be owner operators. I think there's such strong opportunity to have some of those people there and to see could we get them into community owned to become more community owned businesses or employee owned businesses.
So these are great questions. We unfortunately are out of time, so please let's thank